Izzy Morin, and I'm an undergraduate student in the Sustainability and Contemporary Studies departments at Dalhousie University and University of King's College. I'm also a cluster student at Situating Science. This is the fourth episode in a series of podcasts complementing the Hype in Science event, which happened at the University of King's College on December 7th. Hype in Science, or How Can Respectable Journals Publish Such Crap, will take the shape of 6 case studies of overselling, misrepresentation, or biasing in the presentation of scientific research. Voices from Harvard, UBC, Elsevier, and Dalhousie will be presenting case studies from their own fields, and fueling discussion by casting a critical eye towards the peer review process. The process of the rise of a paper to celebrity status will also be under scrutiny. Is a search for breakthrough papers verging on fetishism? And how will trustworthiness in research be ensured in the context of the current collapse of the peer review system? Today we're chatting with Dr. Jock Murray, a professor of neurology at Dalhousie University. Dr. Murray's talk, titled Liberation Therapy, will explore the tension between a public that seems to have no appetite for evidence, a media that leans on anecdotes in the face of science, and the research that is supposed to be informing both of these spheres. Dr. Murray will be using the case studies of the controversial liberation therapy of chronic cerebrospinal venous insufficiency for multiple sclerosis to highlight this tension. So, Dr. Murray, could you explain what the idea of liberation therapy actually is?
In 2009, an Italian cardiovascular surgeon brought forth the theory that obstruction to veins in the neck would cause a back pressure into the nervous system, into the brain, and could cause the problems that develop in multiple sclerosis. He presented work that suggested that every patient with MS had these obstructions in their neck. He also had looked at people with other neurological disease and normal people and said that none of them had this. So it was a very striking observation. He also indicated that if you put a balloon in to dilate the veins and undo the obstruction, that it could relieve the symptoms. That met with a great deal of initial objection by neurologists who questioned a lot of this. But the public interest in it was huge. And as a result, a very small, uncontrolled study was then published, got a great deal of attention. And with the internet, that became widely known to everyone in the MS community at a time that the scientists and the neurologists were saying, wait now, this is a very small, uncontrolled study showing something that doesn't seem to explain what we know about MS.
So what initially led to your suspecting that the public has no interest in the scientific evidence, or lack thereof, surrounding liberation therapy?
Well, one aspect was that nobody bothered to read Zamboni's initial paper. The idea that tended to be on the internet and also in the published media was that Zamboni showed that these patients got better. If people had read the paper, what they would have noticed is that he indicated that only early mild cases of MS seemed to get any relief, and only those in which the veins remained open, and only half of them did remain open. Now, all the other patients who had a more progressive form of the MS did not get any better. However, because nobody bothered to read his paper, it is mostly chronic progressive patients who go for the therapy.
In this case, how is the media leaning on anecdotes? Is it a question of making the information more digestible to the public, or is it a symptom of a bigger problem in how information is conveyed and received?
Well, I think it's a bigger issue. You can describe it as a problem, but it is the media's love with the anecdote. It likes a human interest story. So you'll notice this on the news every night. No matter what the story is, they always like to go into the street or to ask someone or ask the family or the people next door how they feel about this. And so the idea of translating any story to a human interest story or to reduce it to an individual is a widespread media phenomenon. Where it becomes a problem in medical science is that rather than analyzing the studies or the research that's being done, they always will try to reduce it to an anecdote. what happened in Canada and why this became such a widespread Canadian phenomenon is CTV did a story on this, described it as a breakthrough that would change the life of MS patients, did no review or analysis of the study, but then showed 3 patients, all of whom were walking around and said that their life had been changed. That's all people saw. So they didn't get any, and nor were they really interested in knowing what's the background in all of this. Once you have the anecdote, everybody will fixate on the anecdote.
Do you think that a lack of scientific literacy in journalists is contributing to this movement?
Yes, it is. And that can be explained in a number of ways. One is if you look at the major media in Canada, of whether it's print media, television, radio, you find that there are very few professional, trained individuals who have a background in science or medicine. So it's mostly done by other reporters who don't have a background in analyzing these things, nor do they want to. And my experience, because I've done over 60 interviews about this with media across Canada, it's often assigned to the most junior person on in the media. And so that person, again, is more used to translating it to an anecdote. So they want the human interest story, but they're not used to analyzing a scientific paper. And one little aspect that I think is important, having done over 60 interviews with the media on this particular issue, on each occasion I have said, you're going to do a story on Dr. Zamboni's theory of MS. Have you read Dr. Zamboni's paper? Not a single media person had read the paper, but they were all going to write a story about it.
Well, that raises a lot of questions. Do you think that in an ideal situation, could the tension between the media, the public, and the original sources of research be used to the advantage of any given scientific field?
Yes, I think so. You see, I do think that the public is interested in medical and scientific stories. And I think that that's important. I think we have a responsibility to translate our medicine and science for the public. The public, in fact, sponsor most of the research and work that we do. So there is a responsibility there, and I do think the public are interested in knowing and understanding more. But we're involved right now in a kind of hyped stories. So if you're going through the checkout at a grocery store, you'll see magazines that all have these pseudo-scientific stories. Every one of them tells you, for instance, that they have a diet that will make you lose 20 pounds in the next 2 weeks. And everybody really knows in the back of their mind that none of those work. So there's no analysis of this kind of thing. There is a science around it. But I think there is a tendency to want to read the story rather than get the real aspect. I also think that we're to fault to some extent because a lot of scientists don't spend enough time translating their science to a general public in a way that they can understand. And so I think that's something we also have to work at, that the scientific and the medical communities have to spend more time translating what it is they do.
Following from that, do you think that there's any way, so you've said your suggestions for the scientific community to try and make these things more digestible to the public, and I'm wondering, short of that, is there any way that the public can sort of break into the ivory tower without relying on scientists making their work more digestible?
Yes, and again, I think it has to be a collaborative effort. But for instance, institutions like medical schools, universities should have public forums. And then the public can attend and can hear and discuss and raise questions and challenge. So I think both have to play a part in that. But that's something I think increasingly we will begin to see, particularly when institutions understand that it is the public that supports them. And if the public doesn't believe or support what they do, they're going to have a problem in the future. So it's at their peril that they ignore the public's interest.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, Dr. Murray, and thank you to the listeners for tuning in. For more information on Situating Science and the Hypen Science event, visit our website at situsci.ca. That's situsci.ca.